The hall falls silent. 56 years after a young filmmaker first walked the floors of science fiction conventions with dreams bigger than the galaxy itself, George Lucas steps onto the stage at Comic-Con. For the first time in his legendary career, the man who gave us Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and changed cinema forever is here. Not to sell a movie, not to promote a franchise, but to share something deeper, a vision that's taken him decades to realize. The audience erupts. They know they're witnessing history, because George Lucas doesn't just show up anywhere anymore. He's the hermit of Hollywood, the reluctant billionaire who sold his galactic empire and retreated to his ranch. Yet here he is, in Hall H, the sacred temple of pop culture, ready to unveil his most personal project yet. The Lucas Museum of Narrative Art. But this moment, this convergence of past and future, tells a story that runs much deeper than a simple museum announcement. It's the story of a man who spent his entire life building worlds, only to realize that his greatest creation wouldn't be on screen at all. It would be a place where stories themselves could live forever. Picture a young George Lucas in the early 1970s, wandering through the halls of fan conventions with a rough cut of something called Star Wars under his arm. Studios had rejected it. Executives called it too weird, unmarketable, a children's fairy tale in space. But here, among the passionate fans who understood the power of mythology and wonder, he found his people. These conventions weren't just events, they were sacred gatherings where imagination had no limits. Fast forward to 1977. That rejected fairy tale becomes the highest-grossing film of all time. Lucas becomes not just a filmmaker, but an architect of modern mythology. Yet even as his empire expanded through sequels, prequels, merchandise, and theme parks, something was missing. Lucas had always been more than just a director. He was a collector, a preservationist, someone who understood that stories weren't just entertainment, they were the DNA of human culture. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, as Lucas revolutionized filmmaking with digital effects and changed Hollywood forever, he quietly began collecting not just movie memorabilia or props from his own films, but something far more significant: narrative art from every corner of human expression. Comic books that sparked imagination in Depression-era America. Paintings that told stories without words, illustrations that captured dreams before they could be filmed. Digital art that pushed the boundaries of what visual storytelling could become. His friends in Hollywood thought it was just another hobby for the eccentric billionaire. But Lucas saw something they didn't. He understood that the line between high art and popular culture was artificial. Barrier that prevented people from seeing the profound artistry in comic books, animation, and illustration. He had experienced this prejudice firsthand when critics dismissed his space opera as just a kids' movie. The idea began forming in the early 2000s. Lucas would create a museum. Unlike any other, a place where the art of storytelling itself would be celebrated, not just his stories, but all stories. From ancient cave paintings to cutting-edge digital animation. From Norman Rockwell's American narratives to the latest Marvel comic book. It would be a place where a child could stand next to a Monet and understand that both the Impressionist masterpiece and their favorite graphic novel were part of the same human impulse. The need to tell stories, but bringing this vision to reality, proved more challenging than creating the Death Star. Museum boards were skeptical. Cities competed fiercely for the prestige of hosting Lucas's collection. Plans were drawn, revised, and drawn again. Chicago was courted, then abandoned. San Francisco entered the running. The project seemed to shift like the sands of Tatooine, always just out of reach. Then came the most pivotal decision of Lucas's post-Star Wars life. In 2014, he sold Lucasfilm to Disney for over $4 billion. The internet exploded with fan reactions. Some grateful that their beloved franchise would continue. Others heartbroken that Lucas was walking away from his creation. But those closest to him knew the truth. He wasn't walking away from storytelling. He was preparing for his greatest story yet. The sale gave Lucas something more valuable than money, yet gave him freedom. Freedom from the pressure of blockbuster filmmaking. Freedom from the expectations of shareholders. Freedom to pursue his true passion, preserving and celebrating the art of narrative for future generations. The museum wasn't just his next project. It was his destiny. Los Angeles finally won the prize. The Lucas Museum of Narrative Art would rise in Exposition Park, a stunning architectural marvel designed by Ma Yan-song that looks like a spacecraft preparing for liftoff or perhaps landing after a long journey through the stars. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Lucas was coming home to the city where his dreams first took flight as construction began. Something remarkable happened. The art world started paying attention. Critics who had once dismissed Lucas as a mere entertainer began to understand what he had been collecting for decades. His collection wasn't just valuable, it was revolutionary. Pieces by N.C. Wyeth hung next to concept art from Pixar films. Original Norman Rockwell paintings shared space with storyboards from Akira Kurosawa. The collection told the story of human imagination itself, refusing to acknowledge the artificial boundaries between mediums. But Lucas remained characteristically private about his project. While other museum founders courted publicity, he worked quietly behind the scenes. He personally oversaw every detail, from the arrangement of galleries to the design of educational programs. This wasn't going to be a vanity project or a shrine to his own work. It was going to be something more profound, a love letter to every artist who had ever tried to capture the human experience through visual storytelling. The museum's mission statement reads like a manifesto. We believe that all art tells a story, and that the art of popular culture is as worthy of study, preservation, and honor as traditional fine art. These weren't just words to Lucas, they were the culmination of a lifetime spent fighting for the legitimacy of imaginative storytelling in a world that often dismissed it as mere escapism. Which brings us back to this moment at Comic-Con. Lucas, standing on that stage, isn't just making an announcement. He's completing a circle that began decades ago in smaller convention halls. The young filmmaker who once carried his dreams through fan conventions has returned as an elder statesman, ready to share his greatest dream yet. Joined by Academy Award-winning director Guillermo del Toro and Star Wars production designer Doug Chiang, Lucas isn't just showcasing a museum. He's presenting a philosophy that has guided his entire career. The belief that imagination is not just important, it's essential. In a world increasingly divided by cynicism and doubt, the Lucas Museum stands as a temple to wonder, creativity, and the stories that bind us together. Del Toro, himself a master of visual storytelling, understands the significance of what Lucas has accomplished. The panel will discuss the power of illustrated storytelling, he explains. But those who know his work understand he's talking about something deeper, the power of art to transport us, transform us, and remind us of our shared humanity. The preview images that flash across the Comic-Con screens reveal galleries unlike anything the world has seen. Interactive exhibits where visitors can explore the evolution of storytelling from cave paintings to virtual reality. Educational spaces where children can learn animation techniques alongside master artists. Archives where researchers can study the intersection of art, technology, and narrative. This isn't just a museum, it's a cultural institution that will shape how future generations understand the art of storytelling. Slated to open in 2026. The Lucas Museum represents more than just Lucas's personal collection. It represents a fundamental shift in how we think about art and culture. by placing comic book art next to classical paintings, by celebrating animation alongside sculpture, by honoring the artists who create our modern myths. Lucas is arguing for a more inclusive, more honest understanding of what art can be. The emotional weight of this moment isn't lost on the Comic-Con audience. Many of them grew up with Lucas's films, found inspiration in his characters, learned lessons about heroism and hope from stories set in that galaxy far, far away. Now, decades later, they're witnessing him offer something even more precious, a permanent home for the imagination itself. As Lucas speaks about the museum's educational mission, about bringing art to communities that have been traditionally excluded from high culture, about creating opportunities for young artists to learn. From masters across every medium, you can see the passion that has driven him throughout his career. This isn't the measured presentation of a corporate executive. This is the excited sharing of a lifelong dream finally becoming reality. The museum will house over 100,000 pieces of art, making it one of the most comprehensive collections of Chukano Slusa, of narrative art in the world. But numbers don't capture what Lucas has really accomplished. He's created a place where the boundaries between high and low culture disappear, where a child can discover that their love of superhero comics connects them to the same human impulse that created the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Standing ovation after standing ovation greets each revelation. The audience understands they're not just hearing about a new tourist attraction. They're witnessing the unveiling of a cultural landmark that will inspire artists and storytellers for generations to come. In a world that often seems to value cynicism over creativity, Lucas has built a monument to wonder. The presentation includes never-before-seen concept art from the museum's collection, pieces that trace the evolution of visual storytelling from Tusa trace-to-telling, from medieval illuminated manuscripts to cutting-edge digital animation. Each image reinforces Lucas's central thesis, that the human need to tell stories through pictures is one of our most fundamental characteristics, connecting us across centuries and cultures. But perhaps the most moving moment comes when Lucas speaks about legacy. Not his legacy as the creator of Star Wars, but his hope for what this museum can become. He talks about children who will visit these galleries and discover their calling as artists, about researchers who will use these archives to understand how visual storytelling shapes culture, about a future where the artificial divisions between different forms of art finally dissolve as the presentation draws to a close. Lucas makes one final revelation that sends shockwaves through Hall H. The museum won't just display art, it will create it. State-of-the-art studios will allow visitors to collaborate with professional artists, learning techniques from animation to digital painting. Educational programs will bring master artists directly into communities that have never had access to such resources. The museum will be living, breathing, creating just like the art it celebrates. The standing ovation lasts nearly 5 minutes. Fans who have followed Lucas's career for decades understand they've witnessed something special. Not just the announcement of a museum, but the revelation of what may be his most important creation. While Star Wars will entertain generations, the Lucas Museum has the potential to inspire them. As Lucas leaves the stage, walking back into the crowd that launched his career all those years ago, the symbolism is perfect. The young dreamer who once carried his films to fan conventions has returned as a patron saint of imagination, offering the greatest gift any storyteller can give, a place where future stories can be born. The Lucas Museum of Narrative Art opens its doors in 2026, but its impact is already being felt. In choosing to celebrate all forms of narrative art from the most traditional to the most contemporary, Lucas has issued a challenge to every other cultural institution. Stop dividing art into categories and start celebrating the human imagination in all its forms. This Comic-Con appearance wasn't just about promoting a museum. It was about completing a journey that began with a young filmmaker's belief that stories matter, that imagination is essential, and that the art of narrative deserves to be preserved, celebrated, and shared with the world. In the end, perhaps. That's George Lucas's greatest story, the tale of a dreamer who never stopped believing in the power of dreams themselves. The lights dim in Hall H, but the excitement remains. Because everyone in that room knows they've just witnessed the beginning of something extraordinary, a place where every story, from the humblest comic book to the grandest film, will finally have a home worthy of their power to inspire, to transport, and to remind us all of why we need stories in the first place. For George Lucas, this isn't just a museum. It's a love letter to everyone who has ever believed that imagination is the most important force in the human experience. And, judging by the reaction in Hall H, that letter has been received, understood, and embraced by the very community that helped make his dreams possible in the first place.